Have you ever noticed that if you ask 10 people what corporate diversity and inclusion means, you'll get 10 different answers? We invite you to join us for the Inclusion Score podcast as we discuss the standardization of corporate diversity and inclusion. I'm Karen Prater-Jasmine, Chief Data Officer at Inclusion Score.
And I'm James Felton Keith, CEO at Inclusion Score. We'll meet with leading experts, academics, diplomats, and business people about how to methodologically deliver corporate inclusivity across your organization's governance, HR, product delivery, and supplier diversity. Let's focus on getting D&I right, because if you've worked where we've worked over the years, you know that a bad system beats good intentions any day.
WHCR 90.3 FM, New York.
So we heard that story. Please introduce yourself, tell us what you do, and please give some insights.
Sure. First of all, I'd like to start off by saying Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mahir Nisar. I'm an employment attorney. Can you hear me now? Better? Closer, okay. Start again. All right. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
My name is Mahir Nisar. I'm an employment attorney based out of New York City, and I focus on efforts to seek accountability within the workplace for those that have experienced mistreatment, abuse, discrimination, and harassment.
Thank you, Mahir. How did you get your start into that?
Well, that's a good question. I think my own experiences are what brought me in. My own experiences are what brought me into this specific field. I think experiencing it after 9/11, dealing with a lot of the Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry, experiencing the injustice of being told that essentially that you don't belong, and understanding how that impacts people, how it impairs people, how it impacts their voice and their sense of belonging in environments. So for me, that is a major driving force. Obviously, based upon my national origin as well, I'm Pakistani and Kashmiri. And so that definitely plays a big role. But when I went into the practice of law, I didn't know anything about employment law. I honestly didn't. I went to a law school that had an employment law program, and I didn't know that there was a right to an equal opportunity for people based upon their protected characteristics. I did not know that. And I didn't know that there was an effort that you could actually engage in to seek accountability when somebody mistreated you or abused you based upon those protected classes. And so when I saw that, I fell in love with the industry, and being able to do this work is an honor and privilege.
Wow. Thank you for that. You know, I think about even in school, I was a finance major, then went to business school, and you don't really hear, at least I didn't, employment law as an option, right? A lot of people think you just gotta go into HR, but there are so many options there. What I would love to know more about is, let's say you have someone that came to you and they're like, my employer, they just offered me a 6-month severance. My daughter has a disability. They didn't offer any accommodations. I need help. What would you do next?
So I think the most important thing about, whenever a client does come to me is, first of all, evaluating what are the goals of that client, understanding, what their goals are, and then also assessing what are the legal claims that exist, right? We have to understand that there is certain laws, there are certain case precedents. We see how these things get dealt with within the court process, and we have to evaluate how that process will unfold, how that individual who's experienced this, how are they going to deal with it? Do they have the capacity? What's their mental state? Are they getting mental health treatment from what they've gone through? Do they have the financial support in order to withstand the time that is involved in pursuing a case? So there's a lot of questions that we have to determine. Obviously, I think it is a very individual choice, but our goal is to empower the individual to make the best choice that's suited to them, right? We're empowering individuals to make the right choice for them. Not all choices are going to be able to apply to everyone. So everybody has to decide for themselves what is right, but our job as lawyers is to give them the options and recommend what's the best option based upon their set of circumstances.
I'm processing there because that's really powerful, because I would assume that people have one thing in mind when going to an attorney, right? So my first question is, like, what would you say to those people who are saying, I don't have money for an attorney, I don't want to rock the boat, just keep your head down, take the severance, look for another job? What would you say to those people?
So I'm a firm believer in the concept of accountability. I think that this society, our overall society, the whole world, is lacking accountability. We don't have enough accountability. So I fight for that. I believe in empowering people to seek accountability when they've experienced injustice. So with that in mind, I will look and try to advise my clients that you've been offered a severance. Their employer isn't doing you any favors right now. They've just fired you, and they've given you some money at the time of when you're being terminated. So that way you feel in that moment, because you're now in a vulnerable position, economically, mentally, emotionally. You know, you hear how you develop relationships in that environment. And now you're being told you're no longer going to be needed here for whatever reason that they make up. And in that moment, you've been offered a severance, and you don't even recognize what that document truly is, what kind of rights are going to be impacted as a result of it, and how are you going to get to the next place you got to go. A lot of people don't even think about that. Some people may actually find that to be so traumatizing, they end up in a position where they say, well, my career is ruined. And some people feel that. People feel it because a lot of people's identity is tied with the work that they do. They've gone through an education, they have built up the reputation. And in that moment, somebody decides to do something improper and it impacts them. So I always look at the severance and I want to advise clients that, listen, you are giving something up in order to accept that money. They're not doing you a favor. They're giving you that money so that you give up your rights to bring a claim against them. So don't think that when they're terminating you, that that's the right time for you to start trusting them. That's not.
I just felt something on the inside, like that was amazing. Okay, yes. One thing I often see that was powerful, and so very true, because how often do employers do that, right? One thing I see as an investigator is oftentimes the feeling of discrimination. And this is when it may or may not be the case, right? Some things are outright and very blatant, like Carla's situation. Oh, they dropped the ball, right? So that is very clear. But what I see more times than not is this could have been prevented by small behavioral changes. One of them being feedback. Having feedback loops. So it's one of the reasons why I created my firm, to teach and coach leaders on how to give, culturally competent feedback, because we can't be out here, calling Black women aggressive and Latin women feisty, right? But giving actionable feedback. That's something I've seen as just something consistent. What are some of the things you've seen as far as how they could have prevented it getting all the way to your desk?
So I think there's power in developing a paper trail. It's important to build up a record reflecting your position of what you are going through. So if you have a situation involving seeking a medical accommodation, a reasonable accommodation for taking care of a loved one that is going through a medical condition, it's in those circumstances that building up a paper trail reflecting what you're requesting is essential. Because you want that employer to know that you are building up the tracks of what you are asking from them. Because when they know that you have a paper trail, they also know that it could bite them in the behind. And so it's at that point when you're building up the record reflecting your perspective that you are now empowering your voice and your narrative against what that employer is going to build up against you. So understanding that is essential with respect to any requests, any kinds of complaints, any reports that you make to your employer, is building up the record. I always advise my clients and those that are seeking advice to develop a written record via email. Specify clearly what you're asking for, mention what is legally protected, such as, if you're seeking intermittent FMLA, if you're seeking an accommodation to work from home, speak to your doctors, speak with people, and get that documentation over to that employer in a trail that you retain a copy of. Because when you have copies of evidence, because this is all evidence, this is evidence that that employer knows about. It's a part of a business record. And when they know this, they're very unlikely to mess with you. And when they know that they can't mess with you, they treat you really, really well. So it's an empowered state of knowing how to defend your rights and how to make sure that that employer does the right thing by you.
You spoke of an empowered voice. So I've noticed oftentimes it's hard, especially from my HR side, it's hard for people to acknowledge that, especially with the discrimination, that discrimination is happening. And even more so, we've been socialized to not feel comfortable to talk about race or even gender. So to say I'm being discriminated against because I'm a woman, because I'm Black, because I'm Latina, because I'm a part of the LGBTQ plus community, or because I'm over the age of 40, right? Because that's protected by the Age Discrimination Act. Just people, empowering people to feel comfortable enough to say that piece, I've seen to be a little difficult. So how do you help your clients in that space?
Absolutely. I think there's a phenomena of people that tend to audit their own experiences when that employer is gaslighting them. Okay? So you're going to have situations where that employer is going to say that what you're going through doesn't even exist. They're going to give you other perspectives as to how you should feel. And so then you begin to doubt yourself and your experiences, and you go down this road of saying, maybe, you know what? They're right. Maybe I'm thinking too much into this. You speak to a friend, they tell you, maybe you are thinking too much into this. Maybe this isn't what you're going through. But when you feel something, when you experience something, you got to trust your gut. You got to trust your intuition. And not only once you recognize when you are experiencing these things, but understanding what do you do? What are the tools that you need to utilize in an effort to try to make sure that you're able to advocate for yourself in that moment in a protected fashion, right? You want to protect yourself. That environment is there to get rid of troublemakers. It's there to get rid of people that are going to speak up, that is going to challenge the status quo of what you're going through already. They're catering to what you're experiencing. If you're experiencing gender discrimination or racism, they are catering to that. So when you're saying that this is happening to me, you're challenging their environment. You're challenging the people that are above in management that are actually creating that environment for you to experience. And so if you're going to call it out, making sure that you understand, okay, I'm experiencing this. You can always complain in a professional way. You can talk about in an email, like I said before, through your HR department, which is the complaint protocol that company has designated, not because you trust them. I'm not asking anyone to trust your HR. They work for the company. They don't work for you. But you got to trust yourself. You got to trust yourself in speaking up against what you're going through. Nobody's going to tell you within that environment that you're going through it. They're not going to substantiate what you're going through because it's going to hurt them. So you're going to have to build up that paper trail. You're going to have to get those recordings if it's legally permissible within your state. And you got to keep copies of evidence to demonstrate that you've complained about racism or gender discrimination, that you have demonstrated that certain statements that were made to you were improper and made you feel uncomfortable based upon your race or your gender. You got to build up that record so that way that employer can actually recognize that you know what you're doing. Because when they know that you know what you're doing, they're not going to mess with you. It's just the way it goes.
Ooh, let's clap it up for that one. It hurt my feelings a little bit as a former HR professional that you said Complain to HR, not because you trust them, but because they're there. That's part of the complaint procedure. But it's so true. It's so true. Can you speak to how silence plays a role in this?
Yes, I mean, definitely. I've seen a lot of circumstances where people are being stonewalled, right? They complained about discrimination. They may go to their HR because that's what the environment wants, right? They'll tell you, come and talk to us. Let's get on a Zoom call. Let's talk about what you're going through. Don't put it in an email because they don't want that paper trail. And so when you go and speak to them and you raise concerns, you may not even hear from them for like weeks. And you'll be like, I complained. What happened to my complaint? You may not even hear anything after that either. And this often happens when you don't have that paper trail. But let's say you actually experience this when you have a paper trail. Let me tell you, as an employment attorney, I am not going to let them get away with ignoring a complaint of discrimination. I am going to make sure that that court, that jury, that judge recognize that when you were raising concerns about the injustice that environment was making you go through, that they ignored you. They ignored you. Can you imagine how that makes that place feel? Like they just decided to completely ignore their obligations under the law to cater to an equal opportunity for you when you're complaining about how you're experiencing injustice. They ignored you. Not gonna go well for them.
Yeah. It's nothing to add to that. So we've talked about discrimination, and before I go into harassment and like a leader's duty to act, I would love for people who might be watching this and questioning, like, has this happened? Like, what are some, and I know there are so many, but what are some indicators for someone to reflect on to say, maybe I should take this a little further?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first sign is to really check in with yourself and see how are you experiencing that environment. Is it impacting your sleep? I think sleep is the first indicator. Are you not sleeping well? Are you dreading going into work the next day? Are you feeling that environment is not making you feel welcomed? And then you look into communication. Are they even talking to you? Is your supervisor, your manager, the people around you, are they communicating with you? Simple things like, are they saying hello? Are they saying goodbye? Are they inviting you to different events? Are they including you in emails? If you start to notice that these things are becoming more and more clear to you, that these patterns of essentially not including you are occurring, that's when you have to think about, okay, this is what's happening, trusting your gut. If it's impacting your mental health, getting your mental health professional involved. I think people need to understand the value in dealing with a mental health professional when you're going through these very mentally and emotionally impacting type of events. Thinking that you're strong, that's not the way it goes. This is not a matter of strength or weakness. This is a matter of being abused and exploited and mistreated and impacting your mental health in the process. And so you need to make sure you get that care. And so beyond that, I would say that, once you're in that position, when you recognize those patterns, that's when you start hitting them with a paper trail. And that paper trail is going to address it. And if you're not 100% sure, because a lot of people sometimes aren't really clear on whether or not it's actually happening because of their race or gender or disability or their age or their national origin, you can always prepare an email that demonstrates a professional attitude and demonstrates that you have questions about what you're going through. You're noticing these patterns. And because you're noticing these patterns, you just want to raise it as a concern because it's impacting you, it's impacting your health, and you're not sure. Maybe you can look into it. Maybe you can investigate it. And once again, that employer is not going to like it. Don't expect them to like it. They're not going to say that, thank you for. They're going to probably tell you that, thank you for bringing it to our attention. But that's not what they mean. They're not there to sympathize with you and empathize with you. They're there to make sure they preserve the status quo of their environment. And when you challenge it, just make sure that you challenge it in a way that you're building a record of it, that you have a copy of it, that you're saying the right words that specify unlawful treatment, and you keep copies so that way that employer knows that, okay, this is protected activity. And because it's protected activity, I got to make sure to deal with this in an appropriate way.
That is a game changer. So oftentimes you will hear people, I'm not sure. So I love that you said, send an email really talking about the patterns that you've noticed and how it's impacted you, that's huge. So here's a good segue. Let's say, okay, my name is Ama. I wrote this. I noticed. I chat GPT a real good letter, okay, with all the legal jargon. Now I've sent it, but I feel a change in the way they treat me. I feel a change with how my leader engages with me. What happens next?
This is when you double down. When you start to notice that as a result of you raising a protected complaint, such as that you're complaining or you're raising concerns about certain mistreatment you're going through, it's at that point when they ignore you, or if they're not really addressing it, or if the environment starts to get worse, you start to build up a record reflecting that. And you say, I complained to you on September 5th about the situation. Really thank you for taking the time to read my email, but I haven't heard back. And as a matter of fact, I'm starting to notice more changes since I made that complaint. And the type of changes that I'm experiencing is that ever since that day, I've noticed that, John doesn't even look at me anymore. He doesn't come talk to me anymore. He doesn't say hello to me anymore. He's not putting me on the emails. I'm noticing I'm taking off this project. You're going to start to see these patterns, and then when you hit them with another email, they're going to be like, oops, let's take this up to legal. Let's evaluate what kind of risk we're exposed to. And then they're going to think about, what do we want to do? We got somebody here in this environment that has us running. And their lawyer's going to tell them, hey, you got to be careful. You don't want to trigger anything, because if you do something to them, they're going to sue us. And they got a paper trail that's going to reflect exactly what you're doing to them, because they've been building it with you. And so it's at that point you might be in a position where if they don't want you there, they're going to come to the table with a severance. And that severance is going to be the starting point of a discussion to discuss separation. And because if that environment is not giving you an equal opportunity to grow, if it's not giving you a chance at success, what's the point of remaining there? But at the same time, you still went through a form of injustice. You were denied something. Something has been taken away from you. It's not just the money, it's the time. The time is the main kicker here. You're going to have to start all over again. You're going to have to build up that experience, those relationships, that growth pattern that exists within a workplace. So they're taking away time. And getting back that time requires you to understand how much time it's going to take for you to find a position that's equal or better than that one economically, but also how it's impacting you mentally and emotionally. And that's something that I often advise clients to speak with a mental health professional, build up that record to show what you're going through. Don't leave it to, I believe in being spiritual, and I believe in praying, and I believe in these things. But building up a medical record is irreplaceable. So making sure that you have it to demonstrate what you're going through is going to be essential in building up that record, so that way you can hold them accountable.
You got me with that last part. You can pray all you want to, but get a mental health person as well, okay? So 2 things I've learned a lot, but make sure you have a mental health practitioner, and when all else fails, tap into your inner Carla, double down, advocate for yourself, right? Don't just take the first offer. So I asked about what happens when it changes, because retaliation is, 50% of all EEOC claims, and it continues to increase. So on my side, I'm continuously teaching leaders how not to retaliate, which you would think this is kind of common sense, but it's not. So I have 2 more questions for you, but one of them is, what are some of the ways in which you prove retaliation?
Well, first thing is going to be demonstrating that you engage in that protected activity. If you've complained about racism and you have that email paper trail, you have the goods to demonstrate that you engage in that protected activity. And then when you're going to try to demonstrate the adverse action, obviously if they terminated you, then at that point you have the adverse action that's connected to you having made the complaint. But now it becomes a question is there a time? What's the time frame between your complaint and their decision to terminate you or do something retaliatory towards you? You want to make sure that that's within a short period of time, right? If they do it after a year, if it's after a year, it's going to be a hard thing to demonstrate the connection. And so I think it's important to, and once again, when I said about doubling down on the retaliation, when you start to notice that as a result of opposing certain illegal practices by that employer, whether it's discrimination, harassment that's illegal, whether it's you opposing certain unlawful employer practices that could involve workplace safety, it could involve certain fraud that you're recognizing that the employer is engaged in. If you're raising these concerns, you want to make sure that you build a record of it. And when you notice that they're addressing it through an investigation, but then all of a sudden they go silent and then there's like months that are going by, you notice that they're treating you well, it's at that point you got to stay on guard. You got to stay on guard because they are making sure that you don't even know what's going to come to you. So you got to continue to build up that record when you notice after filing that complaint that things may be getting worse. So building up that record, making sure that you continue to complain is going to be what's going to be necessary to demonstrate that you've experienced retaliation. And I'll tell you this, when you have that paper trail and you have that evidence, a lot of times you may not even have to go file anything. A lot of people talk about filing with the EOC or an agency or with the court process. You know, as lawyers, we're focused on finding resolutions without having to file anything, right? That's the best way to go about this. You know, if you're gonna have to go into a legal system, to be honest with you, systemic injustice exists, and the court process is not in any way invisible to that. They are a part of it. And so I think it's important to understand that these processes, these environments, these systems that exist are all intertwined and interconnected. And so you gotta make sure that in the process of building up that evidence that's indisputable, that's when you put that employer in a position to recognize that, okay, it may not be worth it for us to fight this. It may be better for us to try to resolve this early and give them what they want.
Wow, yeah, that was really, really good. Especially when you talked about like that employer or the leader might start treating you well and to stay on guard. Yeah. The other thing I want to add to that is what I often see is now a person who had poor performance that reported the leader is now being held accountable for performance, and it can look like retaliation, which it really is. And so that's the other piece why it's so important to have a formalized process on how you document performance, how you coach performance, how you have a documented process on how you write people up, what's your progressive disciplinary process. Like all of that is so important because what was a problem performer can quickly turn into retaliation when you haven't done what you should have done in the first place. Anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think that's definitely good for the employer, for sure.
Yes,
right?
for the employer.
For the employer to document.
HR, don't trust me. Go
That's
ahead.
exactly the opposite, right? So that's exactly the opposite, which is that they are documenting the reasons why they don't want you there. They're building up that record, and they do it in such a beautiful way.
We do.
Right? They know exactly what to say, how to say it, and build up that record to reflect that you're like the worst person there. Like you're the worst employee. You meet no expectations. Your communication skills are horrible. Whatever it may be, you're not meeting the goals that they've set out for you, right? You're not doing it. And they're going to build up that record and put you in a position where if you have, let's say you've complained about something in the past and they're building this after the fact, that is a form of retaliation. Right? Any adverse action flowing from your complaint is an adverse action. So I think, yes, this is why when the employer knows how to build up a record and write you up and discipline you and build that paper trail reflecting it, take it from them. Build one up for yourself too.
That's good. You're like, keep that energy. Hit them with their got to tap into my Gen Z. Okay, so last question, because you have given us such amazing gems and nuggets to write down. Just any parting thoughts or lasting thoughts you have for employees on how to navigate this workspace and still feel seen, still feel heard, but truly advocating for themselves.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about, what we've talked about here today, and we talk about what we measure success to be. And I recently saw something on social media where it said, success is measured by how safe someone feels. All right? It's not measured by how much money or productivity is made, but how safe somebody feels in an environment. What is their safety? How safe do they feel to be vulnerable? How authentic can be in their environment? You see, ultimately, when people are made to feel unsafe, when they're feeling insecure within their workplaces, they are bound to now feel that everything is going up against them. And that moment, they're like thinking, okay, maybe it's better for me to leave. But the truth is that when it's based upon an illegal motivation, if it's motivated by their race, gender, national origin, them leaving is just sustaining and helping that oppressor engage in what they did.
Ooh. Say that one more time, please.
I don't think I can do it.
Okay.
So it's,
sorry to stop your flow. It's recorded. Okay. It was good.
That's why I think it's so important that we focus on accountability. I think that accountability is what helps us change environments. Because when that employer is held accountable for what they made you go through, they recognize the cost of it. When they have to pay out money for it, when they recognize how it disrupts their environment because of what they allowed to happen, it's at that point that not only does it help change that environment for them to recognize there's a cost of allowing this to occur, but it also helps you as an individual feel empowered, and it helps you in the healing process. I think people don't recognize how important accountability is to healing, because a lot of our traumas and unresolved issues is as a result of people getting away with things that they have done to us, whether directly or indirectly, without any recourse. And that's the thing. We're building up a culture of letting people get away whatever the hell they want to do. And that culture has to change. And it has to change not only from the top, but also from the bottom. Everyone has to be held accountable for the actions that they engage in, the behavior that they engage in. If it harms someone, they got to pay the consequences.
I want to thank you for your time. Even though I do this work, I have still mental notes. I want to go and jot some stuff down. Thank you for sharing your expertise. You can feel the passion, I'm sure everyone can, that you are really the voice for the employees. And thank you for doing